The moment Silas Kane stepped through the hospital's sliding doors, he didn't bother hiding what he was. He walked straight down the center of the corridor, like he owned the floor, the walls, the people on them. Broad through the chest, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most of the nurses made in a month, with a face that had been rearranged once or twice and never apologized for it. He moved the way men move when they've never been told no and have no curiosity about what it would feel like. His eyes swept the ward once, found Nia Holloway at the nursing station, and he smiled like he'd just crossed something off a list. Nurse Holloway. He set both hands flat on the counter. Not a question, an announcement. You and I need to have a conversation. Nia didn't look up from the chart. Visiting hours ended at 8. If you're not a patient, you need to leave. I'm not leaving. He said it like gravity, like weather. And you already know why I'm here. Up then. Couldn't help it. That face, that absolute stillness behind the eyes. She treated men who'd done terrible things, and she could usually smell it on them, the weight they carried, or the absence of it. This one had no weight at all. That was the thing that made her stomach drop. I don't know you, she said. No. But you know the man I work for. He tilted his head. The man you pulled off the sidewalk 4 nights ago. Cleaned up. Kept breathing. He glanced around the ward with something like mild boredom. You're not going to make a scene. You're smart. You've got patients back there, and you won't risk them. He was right. That was the part that made her hate him. She held his gaze, kept her voice flat. I don't know what you're talking about. Silas Kane reached into his coat and set a photograph on the counter. It was her. Outside her building, at approximately 3 in the morning, 4 nights ago, dragging something heavy toward her door through 6 inches of snow. The angle was from across the street, from a car, probably. She stared at it and felt the floor tilt slightly. Where is he? Kane asked. I need you to leave, she said. Right now. He leaned forward and dropped his voice so low she had to hold herself still to catch it. He left your apartment before morning. That means he walked out on his own power, which means you put him back together. And that means he told you something, or left something, or you saw something you weren't supposed to see. He picked the photograph back up. We can do this here or somewhere quieter. Your choice. But you're going to answer me. She was going to call security. She had already decided. Her hand was 6 inches from the desk phone when a different pair of hands appeared from behind Kane, closed around his collar, and removed him from the counter with a force that was somehow both controlled and absolute. Kane barely had time to register surprise before he found himself 3 steps back, staring at a man who had appeared from nowhere. Not a big man, not in the obvious way, but built with an economy of motion that made him look like a compressed version of something much larger. Dark coat, dark eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been through arguments it had won. He held Kane at arm's length with one hand and spoke without looking at Nia. Go take your break, he said. She stared. I'm not taking my break. Nia. He said her name like he'd said it before, which was impossible because she had never seen this man. Go. Take your break. Kane had gone very still. He was calculating. See it. Whatever math he was running, he didn't like the result. The man in the dark coat released him, straightened his collar with 2 fingers, in a gesture that was somehow more menacing than everything else that had just happened. This conversation is over, he said to Kane. You came here. That was a mistake. Don't make a second one. Kane looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Nia. Then he turned and walked back down the center of the corridor, the same way he'd come, and went through the sliding doors and was gone. Nia's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter. The man turned around. I'm Marcus. I work for Damien Voss. I know who Damien Voss is, she said, which wasn't entirely true 4 days ago, but had become extremely true over the last 96 hours. Where is he? Waiting, Marcus said. He'd like to speak with you. He can call me. The blank phone number was still in her apartment, written on a torn piece of paper and tucked under her coffee can because she hadn't known what else to do with it. He doesn't think that's wise, given the current situation. What situation? She kept her voice low because the ward was still moving around her, patients and orderlies, and the ordinary machinery of a hospital night shift. A man showed up at my counter and threatened me. Is that the situation? Marcus's expression didn't change. That was the beginning of the situation. Yes. She had started 4 nights ago, knowing almost nothing. Blizzard had come down like a verdict. Nia had worked a double, 12 hours on the surgical recovery ward, and she was walking from the bus stop to her building with her head down and her shoulders up around her ears when she saw the shapes in the snow. Not immediately. It took her eyes a moment to separate it from the drifts piling up along the base of the building, because the man had collapsed close enough to the wall that he almost looked like part of it. She almost kept walking. She would never entirely forgive herself for the fact that she almost kept walking. But she stopped, crouched, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, and felt a pulse that was there, technically, in the way a car engine makes noise even when it's about to seize. He was breathing in shallow stutters. His coat was expensive and soaked through with blood from a wound in his side that had been roughly packed with what looked like a torn shirt. He'd done it himself, she realized. Conscious enough to apply pressure, then not conscious enough to get anywhere. She looked up and down the empty street. Snow, headlights at a distance, nothing moving. She dragged him inside. 3 flights up because the elevator was still broken, which she had complained about to her super four times in the last month. She kept stopping, repositioning her grip, telling herself she was going to dislocate something or throw out her back, talking to him the whole time, even though he couldn't hear her. It was habit. She talked to unconscious patients. It helped her think. "You're very heavy," she told him. "I need you to know that, for future reference." His apartment obviously wasn't an option. She didn't know which apartment was his. She got him through her own door, got him onto the kitchen floor, because the kitchen had the light, and she needed the light, and she cut his shirt open and looked at what she had. The wound was a gunshot. She'd seen enough in the ER to recognize it. Entry wound in the lower right side, no exit, which meant the bullet was still in there or had fragmented. And that was a conversation she was going to have with herself about the limits of what she could actually do. What she could do: stop the active bleeding, clean the wound, prevent infection from taking hold before morning. What she couldn't do: go into the chest cavity of a stranger on her kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, with supplies she'd brought home out of habit and the better part of a bottle of cheap vodka. She did what she could. It took 2 hours. He came around twice, registered her face, and went back under. The second time he came around, he said something she couldn't catch, and his hand moved like he was reaching for something that wasn't there. "Easy," she said. "You're okay, I've got you." He looked at her like the words didn't fully compute. Then he was out again. By 5 in the morning, he was stable enough that she let herself sit on the floor with her back against the cabinet and close her eyes for 20 minutes. When she came back to herself, she checked his vitals, updated her mental assessment, and allowed herself to look at him properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his early 40s. Hard face, but not cruel exactly. Kind of face that had made decisions and absorbed their consequences. There were older scars, she noticed. Not just this wound. A man who had been damaged before and healed and gone back out into whatever it was that damaged him. She should have been more afraid of him than she was. She attributed her lack of fear to exhaustion and the particular way the brain goes quiet when it's focused on a problem. At 6:45, she went to make coffee. When she came back with 2 cups, on the grounds that he might wake up and need something warm, the kitchen floor was empty. He had taken his torn shirt. He had nothing, except the dark stain on her linoleum and the faint impression where his body had been. She stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee for a full minute. Then she found the envelope on her kitchen table. $10,000 in cash, bound with a rubber band. And under it, a scrap of paper with a phone number written in a hand that was cramped and slightly uneven, like it had been written by someone managing significant pain. 12 digits. No name. No explanation. She put the money in her closet. She didn't touch the phone number. She cleaned her kitchen floor and went to work. That was 4 days ago. In those 4 days, a detective had come to ask about the blood trail behind her building, which she had cleaned up as best she could, but clearly not well enough. His name was Mercer. He was professionally pleasant, and his eyes were professionally empty, and she had told him she'd had a bad nosebleed, and he had nodded in a way that meant he didn't believe her, and they both knew it. He had left his card. She had not called him. She had also noticed the black SUV. It had been parked across the street from her building the morning after. Different position the second morning, but same vehicle, she was reasonably sure, because it had a scratch along the passenger door that caught the light the same way. By the third morning, she'd started taking different routes to the bus stop out of a reflex she couldn't entirely explain. Some survival instinct that had never been engaged before and was now running warm. And now this. A man named Silas Kane in the middle of her ward with a photograph and eyes like empty rooms. Marcus walked her to a car she hadn't known was waiting. She would tell herself later, because she had run out of better options. Because Kane was going to come back. Because Mercer might come back. Because the choices available to her had been narrowing since the moment she dragged that bleeding man through her door, and every road she could see from here went through the same place. Car took her to a building on the north side that had no signage and a lobby with two men in it who looked at her, the way airport security looks at luggage. Elevator up to a floor she didn't catch. Long corridor. A door that opened into a space that was large and mostly dark, except for city light. Coming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and a lamp burning near a chair, and the man sitting in it. He looked worse than he had on her kitchen floor, which was saying something. The color was better, but the eyes were tight with pain he was managing, rather than not having, and he sat with the particular care of someone working around a wound that pulled when he moved. He watched her walk in and said nothing. She said nothing either. She stood 10 feet from him and looked at him improperly, for the first time, with both of them conscious. "You left," she finally said. "I needed to." His voice was lower than she'd expected. Rougher. "I had 2 cups of coffee." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. "I know, I'm sorry." "You're not sorry about the coffee," she said. "You're sorry about everything that came after it." He held her gaze. "Yes." She sat down across from him, not because she'd been invited, but because her legs had decided they were done with the night. "A man named Silas Kane came to my hospital tonight. He had a photograph of me dragging you out of the snow. He wanted to know where you were." "I know." Marcus called me. "He works for you." "Yes." "And the SUV across from my building. That's yours too." "Yes." She leaned forward. "So you've had people watching my building for 4 days. And you sent me $10,000. And you didn't call. And you didn't warn me. And you let that man walk into my place of work." "I didn't let him. I didn't know he was going to move that fast." His jaw worked. "Excuse. That's what happened." "Who is he?" "My lieutenant." He said it like the word tasted bad. "Silas Kane has worked for me for 6 years. He's looking for you." "Yes." "Why is your own lieutenant looking for you like that?" Damien Voss looked at her for a moment, and then looked at the windows. The city was orange and gray below them, the last of the blizzard systems moving east, and the streets were wet and bright with reflected light. He said, "Because I know something he doesn't want me to know. And he knows that I know it. And the people he's been talking to, people who are not my friends, have been waiting for the right moment." "The right moment for what?" "To take what I built." He turned back to her. "Found out I was shot. He's been told I'm dead or close to it. He's consolidating. Which means every person around me who he can reach, he's going to reach." She let that sit. "And me. You're a problem he doesn't know how to categorize. You're not connected to my organization. You don't have protection. And you know enough, or he thinks you know enough, that he can't leave you loose." "I don't know anything." "I know that. He doesn't. No." She looked at her hands. Nurse's hands. Slightly rough at the knuckles, short nails for practical reasons. She thought about Kane setting that photograph on her counter, the absolute certainty in his body that he could do whatever he was about to do and face no consequence for it. She had felt it like cold water. She felt it still. "What happens now?" she said. "That depends on you. Don't do that. Don't make this sound like I have options." "You have options," he said. "They're not good ones, but they exist. Tell me." He shifted in the chair and the movement cost him something, a brief tightening around the eyes. "I can give you a new identity. Clean, solid, built by people who know what they're doing. New city, new name, money to start with. Kane and his people will never find you. And you? That's not your problem." She stared at him. "A week ago, I didn't know you existed. Now you're telling me to disappear. A week ago, you weren't in this. I'm in it now." She stood up and walked to the window. Chicago spread out below her, enormous and indifferent, the kind of city that has always swallowed its own stories without blinking. She had grown up on the South Side. She had worked 18-hour shifts and taken public transit and eaten bad hospital food and built a life that was modest and entirely her own, and she was not going to be relocated into someone else's idea of safety. She turned around. What's the third option? He looked at her without answering. You said the options aren't good ones. Plural. Running with a fake name is one. What's the other? Stay, he said, under my protection, until this is resolved. As what, your guest? Your hostage? As someone I'm responsible for. The words came out blunt and unpolished. He didn't seem to be performing anything. You saved my life. I don't tend to owe people things. This is different. She studied him, the tight, controlled pain behind his eyes, the way he held himself, braced, like he was expecting to be told no, and had already accepted it. This was not a man who was comfortable asking. Kane is going to come back, she said. Not here. He doesn't know about this location. Your own lieutenant doesn't know about your penthouse. I have several places. He knows some of them. His eyes didn't waver. Not this one. She crossed her arms. I have patience. I have a job. I have a life that does not involve criminal syndicates. I know. And you're telling me I can't go back to any of it right now. Not safely. No. The silence stretched. Outside, a siren moved through the city below, distant and then gone. She thought about the hospital. She thought about her apartment, with the light she always left on in the hallway. She thought about her mother calling every Sunday morning. The same conversation, the same check-in, the reliable, ordinary architecture of her actual life. Thought about Kane's eyes and the photograph and the way he'd said her name. I'm not a hostage, she said. No. And I'm not here because I don't have a choice. I'm making a choice. All right. Don't all write me like I'm being managed. She pointed at him, and he had the decency to look slightly abashed. I want to know what's happening. All of it. Not the version where you decide what I need to know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, It's more complicated than one conversation. Then we'll have more than one. She uncrossed her arms. And I want to know about Mercer. Something changed in his face. Something she couldn't read yet, though she was beginning to collect the vocabulary of his expressions, the way you collect words in a foreign language, one at a time, cautiously. What about him? Kane mentioned him, not by name. But when I told you a detective came by, you didn't react, which means you already knew. He didn't answer. Damien. It was the first time she'd said his name out loud, and it sat strangely in the room. What is Mercer to you? An inconvenience, he said. Then, when she kept looking, a problem. He stopped, restarted. He's been on the take for years, various parties. He sells information, and he came to question me. Yes, which means whoever is paying him right now already knows you exist and knows what you might know. His voice was even, controlled. But something underneath it wasn't. He's not protecting you by asking questions, Nia. He's building a picture for someone else. She sat back down. She felt it all settling around her, the whole structure of the last 4 days, the weight of it finding its shape. A wounded stranger, a detective with empty eyes, a lieutenant who moved through her hospital like a man who'd never been stopped, and somewhere underneath all of it, a war she'd stepped into the middle of by crouching down in the snow and checking a pulse. She had done that. She had chosen to do that. She had never seriously considered not doing it. And she did not regret it, which was the most inconvenient thing about the whole situation. Get some rest, Damien said. He was watching her with an attention that was careful and impersonal, and not quite impersonal. There's a room at the end of the hall. Marcus, I can find a room, she said. I don't need an escort. All right. Stop saying all right. Okay, he said, and the not-quite smile was back, brief and undefended, and she filed it away with the other pieces she was collecting. She started toward the hall, stopped. You should be sleeping, she said without turning around. Not sitting in a chair. The wound will pull, and the scar tissue needs pressure off it. I know. You're not going to take my advice. Probably not tonight. She shook her head, kept walking. Behind her, she heard him shift in the chair, and the small sound he made that he was trying not to make, and then the city sounds through the glass, and then nothing. found the room. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark. She did not sleep for another hour. But eventually she did, because she was exhausted, and because her body was practical, even when her mind wasn't, and because she had decided to be here, and decisions, once made, carry their own strange kind of quiet. Outside, somewhere in the city, Silas Kane was moving through the night with his own plans. And a detective named Mercer had already sold something he shouldn't have. And the blizzard was pulling east, and Chicago was enormous and cold and full of its own dark business. And Nia Holloway, who had once saved a dying man's life on her kitchen floor with cheap vodka and determination, was exactly at the center of all of it, and she had not yet decided whether that made her a fool or something else entirely. She slept. The city didn't. She woke up at 5:50 in the morning to the sound of raised voices. Not loud. That was the thing. The voices were the kind of quiet that meant someone was working to keep them down, and that kind of quiet carries further than shouting. She lay still for 3 seconds, mapping the sounds through the wall. Then she was up and pulling on her shoes before she'd made a conscious decision about it. The hallway was dim. One overhead light at the far end, the rest still dark. She moved toward the voices and found them behind a half-open door. Damien's voice, clipped and controlled, and another she didn't know, a younger man's voice that was trying for calm and not quite making it. Stopped outside the door, listened. "Tell me exactly what he took," Damien said. "The secondary ledger. Both drives." He knew exactly where they were, which means he's had access to the office before. "I know what it means." A pause. Something being set down hard on a surface. "Who else was in that building in the last 10 days? Marcus is running it now." But Damien, the younger voice, dropped further. "Kane had a key. You gave him a key 2 years ago." Silence. "Get Marcus in here," Damien said. Nia stepped back from the door, not because she was afraid of being caught listening, but because she needed a moment to hold what she'd just heard. A secondary ledger. Drives. Kane had been inside Damien's operation with a key in his hand for 2 years, which meant this wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was a slow one. The kind that gets built brick by brick, over dinners and small confidences and accumulated trust, and then springs the door all at once. She went to the kitchen, found it an actual kitchen, large and cold, and stocked by someone who expected guests but wasn't sentimental about it. She put water on. She found coffee in the third cabinet she tried. Good coffee, not the institutional stuff she drank at the hospital, and she made a full pot, because whatever the next hour looked like, it was going to need one. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:10, looked at the coffee, and looked at her. "He's asking for you," Marcus said. "I know, I heard." She poured 2 cups, extended one. "Take this in. I'll be there in a minute." Marcus didn't move. He had the kind of face that processed information thoroughly before responding, and he was processing her. "You're not afraid," he said. Not accusatory. More like he was updating a file. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm just not going to do anything useful with it at 6 in the morning, so I'm making coffee instead." He took the cup. The room she'd heard the voices from was an office, or something that functioned as one, a long table, a wall of monitors that were currently dark, and 2 men standing on opposite sides of the table who both looked like they hadn't slept. Damien was at the window. The younger man she didn't know was somewhere around 30, lean and tightly wound, with close-cut hair and the particular exhaustion of someone who had run out of good news several hours ago. "Nia." Damien didn't turn from the window. "This is Rio. He runs logistics." Rio looked at her with something between suspicion and relief. Suspicion because she was new. Relief because she was holding coffee. She set it on the table near him, and he picked it up without being asked. "What did Kane take?" she said. Damien turned then. He'd changed shirts. The new one was dark, and she could see the edge of the bandaging beneath it, the slight way he favored his right side. He looked worse in the flat morning light than he had the night before. More human. More breakable. "Records," he said. "Financial structure. Contacts. The kind of information that tells you where every artery in an organization runs and exactly where to cut. He's handing it to the people who shot you. He already has." Rio set down his cup. "We intercepted a message at 4 this morning. Scrambled, but not scrambled enough. He made contact with Valen's people last night. Valen, she repeated. Dominic Valen. Damien said the name with no particular heat. The way you say the name of something you've been watching for a long time. He runs a network out of the southeast side. Been trying to absorb my territory for 3 years. So patient, methodical. His jaw shifted. He's the one who arranged the hit 4 nights ago. She thought about that. The blizzard, the shape in the snow. The bullet still somewhere in this man's body that she hadn't been able to retrieve on her kitchen floor. So Kane set you up. Kane fed them my route, my timing, and the fact that I'd be moving without a full detail that night, because I was trying to keep the meeting quiet. He said it flat. No performance of betrayal. Just the accounting of it, which was somehow worse. 6 years. Nobody said anything for a moment. The city was coming up outside, gray and wet, the streets starting their morning noise. And Mercer, she said. Where does he fit with Valen? Damien looked at Rio. Something passed between them. Tell her, she said. I heard you talking about the ledger. I'm already in this. Tell me. Rio cleared his throat. Mercer has been on Valen's payroll for approximately 18 months. His job is surveillance and information. He tracks movements, flags persons of interest, runs interference with the department when Valen needs it. He paused. When you showed up in his case file, the blood behind your building, he flagged you to Valen's people within 6 hours of talking to you. Felt it land. 6 hours. She had sat with Mercer's business card on her kitchen table for 2 days, thinking he was just a detective asking routine questions. And 6 hours after he'd walked out her door, her name was on a list somewhere with a line through it. He's not a detective, she said. He's a detective, Rio said. He's just also something else. She sat down, not because she needed to, but because sitting was better than whatever her body wanted to do instead. Pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at them. Nurse's hands. She thought about every patient she had ever talked to who said they hadn't seen it coming. She had always privately believed that people often see things coming and choose not to look directly at them. And now she was sitting at a table in a criminal's penthouse at 6 in the morning, being forced to look at exactly the thing she hadn't looked at directly for 4 days. He's going to come back, she said. He already tried, Marcus said from the doorway. 40 minutes ago. Patrol car parked outside this building. Not his precinct. Wrong jurisdiction. He was looking for her, Damien said. It wasn't a question. Or looking for you. Or both. Marcus came fully into the room. I ran the plate. The car belongs to a Detective Rawlings. He and Mercer came up through the academy together. The room was quiet. So Mercer doesn't come himself, Nia said slowly. He sends a friend. So if anything goes wrong, he's got distance. Smart, Rio said, with a grudging note that meant he didn't enjoy admitting it. Not smart enough. She looked at Damien. He doesn't know you're here. Otherwise, he'd have sent more than one patrol car. He knows I'm somewhere north. Not this address. How long does that last? Damien's answer was a look, and the look said, not long enough. The morning developed the way bad mornings do, in increments, each one slightly worse than the one before. By 8, Rio had confirmed that 2 of Damien's secondary locations had been compromised, not raided, not yet, but watched. Valen was being careful, building a picture before he moved. Marcus brought in a laptop and a hard drive and set them up without explanation. He worked quickly, without wasted motion, and Naya watched him and thought that he was the most efficient person in the room, and possibly the most dangerous, not because of his size or his capacity for violence, which she'd already witnessed, but because of his absolute stillness. He was the kind of man who assessed and then acted and did not spend much time in between. What's on the drive, she asked him. Backups. Things Kane didn't know about. He didn't look up. Damien compartmentalizes, even from people he trusts. Especially from people he trusts, Damien said from across the room. She looked at him. Is that how you've run it for 6 years? Nobody gets the whole picture? Nobody gets the whole picture, because the whole picture doesn't need to exist in one place. Except yours. Except mine. His voice was careful. It's not about trust. It's about structure. Kane trusted you, she said, and you didn't trust him back. Not fully. No, and you think that's why he turned? He looked at her for a moment, with something complicated moving behind his eyes. I think Kane turned because Valen offered him something I couldn't. bigger share, maybe a seat at the table instead of a place beside it. He was quiet. I don't think I failed him. I think he made a calculation and decided the math worked out better on the other side. You sound very certain about that. I'm not certain. I just don't have the luxury of uncertainty right now. She almost said something else, stopped herself. This was not the moment, and he was not the patient, and she was not here to fix whatever damage had been done to this man over the years that made him hold himself like a closed fist. She turned back to the window. Below, the city was wet and moving. Yellow cabs, a delivery truck, a woman walking a dog, head down into the wind. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning in Chicago, indifferent to everything happening 10 floors above it. Her phone buzzed. She'd almost forgotten she had it. Marcus had told her last night to keep it off because it could be tracked, and she'd complied, but she'd turned it back on at some point in the night because she wasn't ready to be entirely cut off. She looked at the screen. 4 missed calls. 3 from her mother. 1 from a number she didn't recognize. Her mother. Sunday calls. The reliable architecture of her life. She stared at the notification and felt something pull hard in her chest. I need to call my mother, she said. The room went slightly still. Not dramatically. Just attention shifted. Not from that phone, Marcus said. Then give me one I can use. Damien started. Calls every Sunday. It's Tuesday. She's called 3 times. She turned from the window. She's going to call someone. She might already have called someone. I need to reach her before she does something that puts her on Mercer's radar. The logic of it registered on Damien's face immediately. She could see it, the way the strategic mind processed threat and calculated. He nodded to Marcus, who produced a burner phone from his jacket, with the ease of a man who kept burner phones the way other people kept breath mints. She took it, stepped out into the hallway, dialed. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been close to the phone. Nia Marie Holloway, do you know how many times, Mom? Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I'm okay. I'm sorry. My phone had some issues and I've been working extra shifts. I'm fine. A pause. Her mother had a way of processing silence that was entirely different from the silences in the room she'd just left. This one was warm and suspicious in a completely ordinary way. The suspicion of a mother who knew her daughter's voice. You don't sound like yourself, her mother said. I'm tired. You're always tired. This is different tired. She pressed her back against the hallway wall, closed her eyes for 3 seconds. I'll call you properly on Sunday. Promise. Don't if anyone comes by asking about me, don't tell them anything. Hospital policy stuff. Privacy, okay? Another pause. Longer. What kind of trouble are you in? I'm not in trouble. The lie landed wrong even to her own ears. I love you Sunday. She hung up, stood in the hallway with the burner phone in her hand, and the sound of her mother's voice still sitting in her chest like something she'd been carrying without knowing it. When she went back into the office, Rio was on his feet and Marcus had moved to the monitors, which were now live, showing feeds from what she assumed were cameras on and around the building. Damien was at the table with something in front of him, a photograph, she realized. He looked up when she came in. Sit down, he said. Why? He turned the photograph to face her. It was her, outside her apartment building, but not from 4 nights ago. This was different daylight. Yesterday afternoon, and she was in her work scrubs with her bag over one shoulder, heading for the bus stop. Stared at it. Where did you get this? She said. Rio found it 20 minutes ago. It was sent from a number registered to a shell company connected to Valen's network. He let her look at it. They've been watching you since before Kane came to the hospital. Put the photograph face down on the table. She didn't need to keep looking at it. So this started before yesterday. Yes, before Kane confronted me at the ward. Kane confronting you was theater, a show of force. By the time he walked through those doors, they already had what they needed. Damien's voice was even, but she was getting better at hearing what was underneath it. Right now underneath it was something taut and cold. You weren't a loose end they needed to find. You were a piece they'd already identified. Kane coming in person was a message. To you, she said. He was telling you he was willing to go after anyone connected to you. Yes, she thought about that. Being a message. Being a piece on a board. She had spent her entire career learning to see patients as human beings first, not conditions. Not charts, not problems to be managed. The inversion of that being seen as a position, a leverage point, a piece of information was nauseating in a way she hadn't anticipated. If I'd taken your offer, she said, the new identity, they'd have found it, eventually. Valen has significant resources. He said it without softening it, which she was coming to understand was his version of respect. He didn't prettify things for her. Running was never as clean an option as I made it sound. So you were giving me the choice, even though one of the choices wasn't actually viable. I was giving you the choice because it was yours to make. Stared at him. He stared back. The morning light was coming in flat and gray, and neither of them looked away. You should have told me all of this last night, she said. I know. That's twice. You've said I know, when what you mean is I'm sorry. Something moved across his face. Old habit, he said. Not apologizing. Work on it. He almost laughed. She wasn't sure. The sound was too brief and too rough to be certain. But something happened in his face that briefly looked like what a man might look like before he laughed, and she filed it away. At 10:15, everything moved at once. Marcus called out from the monitors. His voice was unchanged. He didn't appear to have a register for alarm, only for information delivered at different speeds, and this was the faster speed. 3 vehicles, North Approach Police. Rio was already moving. Damien was on his feet, the controlled, careful movement gone, replaced by something that was simply fast. He looked at Nia. Hallway closet, he said. 3rd door on the left. There's a panel in the back wall. It opens into the service corridor. I'm not going to... It's not a debate. The voice that came out of him now was different from every voice she'd heard from him. Flat. Absolute. Not threatening. She didn't feel threatened, which was strange given the circumstances, but simply beyond argument. The voice of someone who had made decisions under pressure for long enough that the pressure no longer altered the quality of the decision. 3 armed vehicles means they found this location, which means there are more coming. You go to the service corridor, you go down to the 2nd floor, and you wait. Marcus will come for you. And if Marcus doesn't come, he reached into his jacket, and she tensed involuntarily. He held up both hands slightly easy, and then slowly produced a phone. Another burner, already with a number typed into it. Call that. The man who answers will move you. His name is Doyle. Tell him Voss sent you. She took the phone. Their hands were 3 inches apart, and she felt the proximity of it, the warmth, the slight tremor that was either pain or adrenaline, and probably both. How did they find this address? She said. His eyes didn't move off the monitors. Only one way. Someone who knew it, yes. Rio, she said it before she'd fully decided to. He looked at her then, sharp and startled. Rio has been with me for 4 years. Rio was the one in the room when you came back last night. And Rio was the one who told you about the compromised locations. First in, first out. Information as cover. She heard herself and felt cold at how clearly she was seeing it. How did Kane know which drives to take? Someone had to tell him where they were. The silence that followed was the kind that changes a room. Rio had gone completely still in the doorway. He was looking at Naya with an expression she couldn't categorize for a full 2 seconds, and then she recognized it, because she had seen it on patients who'd received a terminal diagnosis. The moment when a person understands that the ground beneath them has shifted and is not shifting back. Damien, Rio said. His voice had changed. Lower, thinned out. Listen to me. Don't, Damien said. I can explain. Don't. The word came out with a weight behind it that shut the room down entirely. Damien looked at Marcus. Something passed between them that required no words. Marcus moved to Rio's position, with the patient efficiency of someone doing a job, and Rio's hands went up, and he started talking fast. Words tumbling out. Justifications and circumstances in a woman. Somewhere. Someone he was protecting. A debt he'd owed. Nia didn't stay to hear it. She was already in the hallway. 3rd door on the left. The panel in the back of the closet. Her hands found it by touch, in the dark. Pressed until it gave, and she was through it, and into the cold concrete of the service corridor before she'd taken 3 full breaths. She stood there in the near dark, with both phones in her hands, her own and the burner, and she could hear, distantly, the building coming to life in the wrong way, elevators moving, stairwell doors, the sounds of a structure being entered by people who were not guests. She had chosen to be here. She had told him that. A choice, freely made, with whatever limited information she'd had at the time. But the information she had now was different. and kept being different every hour, and the floor kept moving beneath her. And the one fixed point she could locate in any direction was the simple fact that she had made it this far by trusting her own instincts. And the instincts were still running, warm and specific, telling her to move. She moved, down the service stairs, one hand on the railing, feet quiet on the concrete. Second floor, a door. She stopped behind it and listened. Footsteps on the other side, but they were moving away, not toward. She counted to 8, and then she was through, and into the corridor, and walking like she belonged there. Because she'd learned long ago in hospital hallways that the key to moving unseen is to move like you know exactly where you're going, even when you don't. Her hand closed around the burner Doyle, the man who answers. She pressed call. It rang twice. A voice answered that sounded like a door closing. "Voss sent me," she said. "My name is Nia." A pause of approximately 1 second. "Then where are you?" "Second floor. East corridor. There's a window at the end with a fire escape. Don't touch the fire escape. It's visible from the street. There's a laundry room 20 feet to your left. Get in it and lock the door." She was already moving. "How long?" 4 minutes. A pause, maybe 5. "Is that a real estimate, or are you making me feel better?" The voice on the other end was quiet for a beat. "Both," it said, and then it was gone. She found the laundry room. She locked the door. She stood in the dark between 2 industrial machines that smelled of detergent and heat, with a phone in each hand and her heart doing something rhythmic and insistent against her ribs. And she thought about Rio's face when she'd said his name, the way the ground had shifted in his eyes. The woman he'd mentioned, the debt, the justification, she had heard all of it and hadn't stayed to process it because there was no time, but she was processing it now. In the dark, in the 4 minutes that were maybe 5, everyone in this was protecting something. Silas Kane wanted a seat at a bigger table. Dominic Vallon wanted territory. Mercer wanted money or safety or both. Rio had a woman somewhere and a debt, and apparently those things together had been enough. And Damien Voss, who held everything together with information compartmentalized so precisely that even his most trusted people only ever saw a portion of it. He was protecting something too. And she thought she was starting to understand what it was, though she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. And herself, what was she protecting? The question sat in the dark with her and didn't offer an answer. And before it had time to settle properly, the laundry room door rattled once, twice, and a voice said quietly through the gap, "Nia," a voice she didn't know. Doyle, presumably. She unlocked the door and looked at a man who was somewhere in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a maintenance uniform that fit like he'd been poured into it, with the kind of face that had decided long ago not to give anything away. "Come on," he said. "We're not taking the street." He had a van in the building's service bay. She got into the back without being told to. The doors closed and the van moved, and she sat on a bare metal floor in the dark, with her back against the wall. And she thought about Damien upstairs, in a building that was being entered by armed men. And she thought about Marcus. And she thought about Rio with his hands up and his voice unraveling. And she thought about the photograph of herself heading for the bus stop in her scrubs, already watched, already marked, before she'd even known there was anything to watch for. The van hit a bump. She grabbed the wall. Outside, she could hear Chicago. The ordinary noise of a city going about itself while something violent and invisible moved through its bones. She was not going home. She understood that now, with a clarity that felt less like fear than like weather. Simply a condition she was moving through. Home was a place on a map that other people were now standing near and watching, and the woman who had lived there simply and carefully and on her own terms was going to have to find a different set of terms, because the old ones had run out 4 days ago in a blizzard, in the moment she'd stopped and crouched down and pressed 2 fingers to a stranger's neck. She had saved his life, and that single act, stitched together in the dark on her kitchen floor, had pulled every other thread loose. The van moved north. The city moved past. And somewhere behind her, in a building she was now moving away from, the point she could never return from had already passed without fanfare, without announcement, without any of the dramatic punctuation she might have expected from a moment that large. It had passed in the dark of a laundry room, somewhere between the 4th minute and the 5th. Doyle didn't talk. That was the first thing she registered about him as a person. Rather than a function he drove, without filling the silence, without offering reassurances, without doing any of the things people did when they were uncomfortable with quiet. He simply drove, both hands on the wheel, eyes moving between the road and the mirrors in a rhythm that told her he'd done this kind of driving before and expected to do it again. She appreciated it. She was not in a state for reassurance. The van moved for approximately 20 minutes before it stopped. She heard a garage door mechanism, the grind and clunk of it, and then they were inside somewhere and the engine cut. And Doyle opened the back doors from outside and looked at her without expression. "Safe house," he said. "Voss uses it maybe 4 times a year. Kane doesn't know about it because Voss never brought him here." "How do you know Kane doesn't know about it?" Doyle considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't," he said, "but it's what I've got." She climbed out. A warehouse space, or something converted from one concrete floors, high ceilings, a smell of old machine oil, underneath something cleaner and more recent. Someone had put in walls at some point, rough partitions that created rooms without entirely committing to them. There were cots, a folding table with a medical kit on it that she moved toward automatically, assessing its contents, before she'd consciously decided to. Gauze, suture kit, broad-spectrum antibiotics in blister packs, saline. 2 tourniquets. Someone had put the knowledge of what they were doing, but it was a trauma kit built for immediate crisis management rather than recovery care. "Coming here?" she said. "If he can." "What does that mean?" Doyle's face didn't shift. "It means the building had armed people coming in from the north approach when we left, and Marcus was still in there, and I don't have information beyond that." Pressed both palms flat on the table, took a breath, let it out. She thought about Marcus and his still face and his efficient hands and the way he'd moved to intercept Silas Kane in her hospital ward without breaking stride. She thought about Damien in that room, on his feet, the controlled, careful movement gone, replaced by something simply fast. She thought about Rio. She picked up her phone, called the burner Damien had given her. It rang 6 times and went to nothing. Not voicemail, just silence and then dead air. She was still standing at the table 40 minutes later when the side door opened and Marcus came through it. He was bleeding from a cut above his left ear that had bled down into his collar and dried there, and he was walking with a slight drag in his right leg that he was compensating for with enough practice that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. She was looking. She had the kit open before he'd crossed half the distance. "Sit," she said. He sat. Not because she'd told him to, she suspected, but because his body had decided it was time. "Where is he?" she said. "Coming. Separate route." Marcus held still while she cleaned the cut, which was superficial, but had bled extravagantly the way head wounds did regardless of severity. 2 of Valen's men got to the elevator bank before we did. Damien went through the stairwell, by himself. Not entirely. She didn't ask about the not entirely. She focused on the cut. Marcus's face was like working on a statue, no flinching, no involuntary responses, just the occasional controlled exhale when she pressed harder than expected. "Rayo," she said, contained. "Is he alive?" A beat. "Yes." "Are you going to tell me what Damien is going to do with him?" "No." She tied off the butterfly closure, stepped back and looked at her work. Clean enough. He'd carry a scar, but he was already carrying several. The woman Rio mentioned. The person he was protecting. Marcus looked at her. He was deciding something. "Tell me," she said. "Because if there's a person out there who Valen's people know about, she's in the position I was in 4 days ago and she doesn't know it yet." Something shifted in Marcus's face. "Not much. Enough. Rio has a sister. She's been living under a different name in Milwaukee for 2 years. Valen found her. Used her as leverage to get Rio to feed information. Nia sat down on the cot across from him. So he wasn't doing it for money. No. He was doing it to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. Yes, and he still almost got us all killed." She said it without anger. Just the fact of it. Marcus nodded once, which was the closest she'd seen him, come to expressing something complicated. The door opened again, and Damien walked in, and she stood up before she'd decided to. He was intact. That was the first red. The nurses read. Inventory of visible damage. Nothing obviously broken. No blood she could see through the dark coat, though the coat itself had a tear along the left shoulder that hadn't been there before. His breathing was slightly elevated. His face was the face of a man who had moved fast through an emergency and was now decelerating, the chemicals still running through him, the body still insisting on readiness while the situation had temporarily resolved. He looked at her, and his breathing changed. Or maybe she imagined that. "You're all right," he said. "I told you I'd be all right. You didn't tell me that. I implied it." She crossed her arms. "Sit down. Let me look at the wound. The wound is Damien." She said his name the way she said it to patients who were about to tell her they were fine. He recognized the tone. She could see that, and he sat down on the cot. Marcus had just vacated. She lifted his shirt. The bandaging had held, which was better than she'd feared. But the movement of the last hour had stressed the wound, and there was seepage at the lower edge that needed attention. She worked without commentary. He held still with the same controlled discipline he brought to everything. And the room was quiet, except for the sounds of the work and the distant noise of the city through the warehouse walls. "Rio's sister," she said. "I know, she needs to be moved. I know Marcus is handling it. I'm telling you, it needs to happen fast." She pressed a new dressing into place. If Valen knew about her well enough to use her as leverage, he might decide she's worth more as a message than as a tool. He was quiet for a moment. "Then you think like this naturally." "I think like someone who manages emergencies for a living." She stepped back. "How many more people in your organization have someone vulnerable? Someone who could be found and used?" He looked at the floor. "I don't know. You should know." "I know." He said it with a roughness that meant he understood the gap and didn't need her to explain the cost of it. "It's not how I built it. I built it on compartmentalization. Nobody knew enough to be fully leveraged. Except they knew enough about the people next to them. Yes." She put the medical supplies back in order. Methodical. Each thing in its place, cap back on the saline, suture kit rolled closed. "What happened in the building?" "After I went to the service corridor." He looked at his hands. The knuckles of his right hand had the kind of redness that meant recent impact. "We held the floor long enough to pull the hard drives Marcus had set up. The men Valen sent weren't there to kill anyone. They were there to take documents, records. The same thing Kane had already pulled." He paused. "Which means they already have what they came for once. Coming back for more means either the first set wasn't complete, or they're trying to see what else exists. Or they're mapping your responses," she said. "Watching how you move when you're pressured. Finding your pattern." He looked at her. "Yes, Valen is patient. You said that yourself." "Methodical." She sat on the cot across from him, mirroring the position she'd been in with Marcus. "He's not going to come at you directly until he knows exactly how you'll react. He's running experiments." The silence stretched. Damien's eyes were on her with an attention that had a quality she was still calibrating, not calculating, not possessive, but specific. He looked at her the way people looked at things they were trying to understand rather than things they thought they already knew. "You're angrier than you're letting on," he said. She didn't respond. "Nia." "I'm processing," she said. "There's a difference between angry and processing, between feeling something and making it useful." She met his eyes. I'm angry. I'm angry that I'm sitting in a warehouse in a city I've lived in for 31 years, and I can't go home or go to work or call my mother from my own phone. I'm angry that a man I've never met decided I was a piece on his board because I stopped in the snow." She kept her voice level. "But angry doesn't get me anywhere. So I'm figuring out what comes next instead." He was quiet for a long time. "What comes next," he said, "is that I need to get ahead of Valen. Stop reacting and start moving." "How?" "There are two people in Valen's structure who aren't loyal to him by choice. They're there because they owe debts or they're afraid. I've known about them for a year. I didn't move on it because the situation didn't require it." His jaw set. "It requires it now." "And Kane?" The room temperature dropped about 3 degrees. "Kane is a separate problem," he said. "Kane is the central problem. He's the one who has your financial records and your contact list and 6 years of operational knowledge." She leaned forward. "Where is he?" "I know where he'll be tonight." She waited. "There's a meeting," Damien said. "Valen and his lieutenants. Kane will be there as Valen's proof of concept, a defection that legitimizes Valen's takeover narrative. A public demonstration that Damien Voss is finished and the transition is already underway. Where? A restaurant in Bridgeport. Private dining room. Valen controls the building, so you can't just walk in. No. She looked at him. But you know about the meeting. I have a contact. Someone who isn't named Rio. A slight edge in the voice. Not cruelty. Just the cutting quality of someone who was still absorbing what Rio had cost him. What are you going to do? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved to the warehouse wall, to some middle distance where he was running calculations she couldn't follow. I'm going to burn the meeting, he said finally. Not physically. I'm going to make sure that every person in that room understands that Valen's play failed, that I'm still standing, that Kane handed over records that were... He stopped. That were what? She said. And then something happened in his face. Something she hadn't seen before. A stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness, not the controlled, managed kind, but the kind that happened when a person's mind arrived somewhere unexpected and was taking a moment to fully process the view. The secondary ledger, he said slowly. The drives Kane took. What about them? He looked at her. Rio told Kane where they were. Yes. Rio knew where the real drives were because I showed him 4 months ago during a restructure. He had to verify the backup protocol. His voice was losing its evenness in a way that had nothing to do with pain. But Rio also knew that 3 weeks ago I moved the primary records, restructured the entire system. New encryption, new physical locations. He stood up from the cot. He knew because he helped me do it. She stood too, automatically. So the drives Kane took are 6 months out of date. He said it with a flatness that was not relief. The financial records Kane handed to Valen are real, but they're an old map. The accounts have been moved. The contacts have been reshuffled. Structural information is accurate for a version of my organization that no longer entirely exists. She took that in. Kane doesn't know that. No, he wouldn't. The only people who were part of the restructure were Marcus, Rio, and he stopped again. He stopped the second stop in 2 minutes, and this one longer than the first. And who? She said. His face had gone somewhere she couldn't read. And Mercer, he said. Caleb Mercer helped facilitate the financial transfer. He's a dirty cop with banking contacts I needed. I used him. He doesn't know the full scope, but he knows enough to understand that the records Kane stole are incomplete. The room took a moment to absorb this. So Mercer knows Kane has bad information, she said.
Yes.
And Mercer is working for Valen.
Yes.
Which means she stopped, ran it through again. Mercer might tell Valen. If he wants to stay useful to Valen, he tells him the records are outdated. He exposes Kane's value before Valen finds out on his own. Or, Damien said, Mercer keeps it to himself. Because if Valen finds out the records are bad, Kane becomes worthless. And if Kane becomes worthless, whatever deal Mercer has brokered using Kane as the centerpiece also becomes worthless. His eyes were moving fast now, the way eyes moved when a mind was working at a speed the face couldn't quite contain. Mercer has a choice. Protect himself by telling Valen, or protect his position by staying quiet and hoping Valen doesn't figure it out. How long before Valen figures it out? A week, maybe 2. His analysts will go through the records, try to access the accounts, find they've been moved. He exhaled through his nose. Tonight's meeting is in 6 hours. She looked at him. He looked at her. The logic sat between them like a third person in the room. If you can get word to Valen tonight, she said carefully, that the records are incomplete, then Kane's entire value proposition collapses in the middle of the meeting. And you don't have to go near the building. No. He turned, took 3 steps, turned back. But to get word to Valen, it has to come from someone Valen considers neutral, someone with no stake in Damien Voss's survival. She felt where this was going before he said it. No, she said. Nia, I'm a nurse from the South Side. I have no involvement in any of this. She heard herself use the present tense and recognized the irony of it. If I walk into anything connected to Valen, I become permanently involved. I become a person who made a choice, not a person who got pulled in. You're already permanently involved. There's a difference between being pulled in and walking in. Not to Valen. His voice wasn't hard. That was the strange thing. He wasn't pressing her. He was laying out the geometry of the situation and letting her find her own way around it, which was somehow worse than being pushed. To him, you're already a known quantity. He has the photograph. He had Mercer run your background. He knows your work history, your address, your mother's phone number. He let that last one land with its full weight. The line you're trying to hold doesn't exist for him. Her mother's phone number. She had used the burner to call her mother this morning. But before that, before Marcus's phone, she had turned on her own phone in the night, just for a moment, and she'd seen the missed calls, and she'd been seeing them. And, my phone, she said. My own phone. I turned it on last night. I know. For how long? 40 seconds. He wasn't accusing her. She almost wished he was. 40 seconds. The time it took to read a notification screen and decide to make a call. 40 seconds of signal, broadcasting her location from a floor that Valen's people were now apparently moving toward. She had moved through the service corridor and into a laundry room and a van. But 40 seconds of signal from a known number attached to a known face was 40 seconds of data, and data was what Valen built his methodical, patient strategy from, brick by patient brick. Troll car this morning, Mercer's friend. Wasn't looking for me, Damien said. He was looking for your signal. She sat back down on the cot. She sat there with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the concrete floor, and she thought, with the terrible clarity of someone who has just understood a mistake too late. Call to her mother had felt like the most human thing she'd done in 4 days, and it had cost her the only clean exit she'd had left. No new identity, no clean disappearance. Valen's people had her phone signature now. They could track every burner she touched if they got close enough. Marcus came back into the room. He looked at Damien and then at Nia and read the room in about 1.5 seconds. He set a phone on the folding table. Rio's contact in Milwaukee confirmed. His sister is out. She's somewhere Valen won't look. Damien nodded. He didn't look away from Nia. Marcus looked between them again. There's something else. He picked up the phone and turned the screen to face the room. Photograph. Taken recently, the timestamp in the corner read 3 hours ago. It was a woman Nia didn't know, middle-aged, standing outside a house on a street that was quiet and ordinary and familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. And then she could place it. That was her mother's street. The woman in the photograph wasn't her mother. She was standing 2 houses down, not watching the house exactly, but positioned in a way that meant she could. Hands in her pockets. Face turned slightly. Valen's people, Marcus said. We pulled it from a city traffic camera that covers the block. Nia looked at the photograph for 4 seconds. Then she looked at Damien. Get her out, she said. Her voice came out low and without inflection, which was the voice that happened when everything underneath was moving too fast for the surface to carry it. We're working on. Now, she stood up. Both feet on the floor, weight forward, and something in her posture had changed. She could feel it changing. The last holdout, position she'd maintained the reasonable distance. The emotional margin. The this is not entirely my problem, giving way like ice under too much pressure. You get my mother out of that house right now. Tonight. Not when it's convenient. Right now. Damien looked at Marcus. Doyle, he said. Marcus was already on the phone. She stood in the center of the room with her heart going at a rate she'd have told a patient to sit down and breathe for, and she breathed for it herself because she was not going to be the person in the room who lost control. And she breathed until the rate came down, 2 notches into something functional. And then she looked at Damien and said, with a quietness that was not soft, tell me what you need me to do. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she had time to register the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was genuinely trying to assess you honestly, without the distortion of wanting you to be one thing or another. There's a man, he said. He's not connected to Valen, and he's not connected to me. He's a journalist. His name is Tillman, and he covers organized crime for a paper that Valen's lawyers have tried to bury 3 separate times. His voice was measured. If Tillman receives documentation tonight, specific documentation about the financial relationship between Mercer and Valen, it creates a problem for Valen that he can't solve with armed men in a building. You expose Mercer, and through mechanism Valen uses to move money through the city's infrastructure. Dirty cop is one story. Dirty Cop as the financial nerve center of a criminal network is a different story. He paused. It doesn't end Valen, not immediately. But it publicly destroys his position with the people he's been telling he's clean, the developers, the city contacts, the people who've been convinced he's a legitimate businessman with unfortunate associations. Kane? Kane becomes a liability the moment Valen's public face collapses. A man who defected to a sinking ship. Something cold and unhurried moved through his voice. Kane I'll handle separately. She absorbed this, the documentation. The drives Marcus pulled from the penthouse before we cleared the floor. There are financial records there. Mercer's accounts. Transaction trails. All of it. He exhaled. But Tillman won't accept it from anyone connected to me. Poisons the story. He'd think it was manufactured. She understood. She was already understanding it before he finished the sentence, and she was already calculating the distance between who she was and who this required her to be, and she was finding that the distance was smaller than she'd expected, which told her something about what 4 days in this world had already done to her. You want me to take it to him, she said. You're a nurse. You have no criminal record. You have no documented connection to my organization. You are on paper an ordinary citizen with a credible reason to be horrified by corruption. He held her gaze. Tillman will listen to you, and if Valen figures out what's happening before the story runs. Damien was quiet for exactly the length of time it took a person to decide not to lie. Then we'll have a different problem, he said. The warehouse was cold. It had always been cold. She just hadn't been tracking it until now. She felt it through her scrubs, through the thin layer of a jacket she'd grabbed on her way out of the penthouse. Through the skin she was standing in, that was the same skin she'd been standing in 4 days ago, on a snowy sidewalk when this had all been a shape in the dark. She thought about her mother on a street in the south side, with a woman standing 2 houses down, hands in pockets, face turned slightly. She thought about Kane walking down the center of a hospital corridor like he owned the floor. She thought about the blank phone number under her coffee can, the $10,000 in her closet, the dark stain on her kitchen linoleum that she had scrubbed twice, and that she suspected was still faintly visible if you knew to look. She had spent her entire career making decisions in emergencies. The difference between the people who functioned in emergencies and the people who didn't wasn't fearlessness. Every good she'd ever known was afraid. It was the backbone of the job, the thing that kept you sharp. The difference was that the people who functioned made the decision and moved. They did not wait until the fear receded, because the fear never receded. It just became background noise, and you worked through background noise. She had been doing that for 4 days without fully naming it. She was naming it now. I'll need to know everything about Tillman, she said. His paper, his process, what he needs to feel safe running the story. She looked at Damien directly. And I need Doyle to confirm my mother is out before I leave this building. Done. And when this is over, when Valen's position is broken and Mercer is exposed. She paused. I want to go back to my life, my actual life, my apartment, my job, my Sunday calls. She paused again. Is that something you can guarantee? Damien Voss looked at her with his hard, careful face and his eyes that had stopped being unreadable to her somewhere in the last 6 hours. And he said, I can't guarantee anything, but I'll spend whatever I have trying to make it true. It wasn't the answer she wanted. It was the honest one, and she had asked him to be honest. And so she took it, and she nodded once. And she said, then let's start. Tillman worked out of a narrow office above a Vietnamese sandwich shop on North Clark, and he was the kind of man who looked exactly like what he was, someone who had spent 20 years being told to drop stories and hadn't dropped them. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, thick through the chest, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a desk that functioned as a geological record of his career. Strata of papers and folders and coffee cups, going back to a depth that suggested he'd stopped trying to impose order on it sometime around 2015. He looked at Nia when she came through the door with the kind of look that was simultaneously suspicious and curious. The look of a man who had learned that unexpected visitors were either the best thing that happened to a story or the worst. Mr. Tillman, she said, my name is Nia Holloway. I'm an ER nurse at Northwestern Memorial. I have documentation about a financial relationship between a Chicago homicide detective named Caleb Mercer and a man named Dominic Vallon, and I need you to look at it tonight. Tillman took his glasses off his forehead and put them on his face. He looked at her over the top of them. Sit down, he said. He sat. She put the drive on his desk. He looked at it, looked at her, and said, "Where did this come from?" "From the organization Mercer has been feeding information to for 18 months. She held his gazes. Not Vallon's organization. The other one. Voss. He said it the way you say the name of a weather system. Recognition without surprise. You're connected to Damien Voss. I'm a nurse who pulled a bleeding man out of the snow 4 days ago and has been running from the consequences since. That's my connection." She kept her hands still in her lap, both of them, flat and quiet, the way she kept them during difficult conversations with families in waiting rooms. The documentation is real. Transaction records, account numbers, a wire transfer trail that goes from Vallon's shell companies through 3 intermediaries to an account registered to Mercer's brother-in-law in Evanston. 14 months of payments averaging $8,000 a month. Tillman's jaw moved. He picked up the drive. "I can't run anything based on an anonymous source and a drive someone handed me from an organization with its own interests in destroying Vallon. I know. That's why I'm not anonymous." She reached into her jacket pocket and put her hospital ID on the desk. Nia Marie Holloway, Northwestern Memorial Surgical Recovery Ward. You can verify everything about me in 10 minutes. And the account numbers on that drive are verifiable independently. They're not manufactured. They're real accounts that exist at real banks and have real transaction histories that your financial editor can pull. She paused. "You've been trying to build this case for 2 years. I've read your last 3 pieces on Vallon's network. You keep getting close, and then the sources go quiet." His eyes didn't leave her face. "They go quiet because Vallon's lawyers threaten them, or because Mercer flags them to Vallon before they can talk." She let that land. "He's been your problem from the beginning. The reason your sources dry up. The reason tips don't develop. He identifies them for Vallon, and Vallon handles it quietly." Tillman sat back in his chair. It creaked with the weight of a man doing rapid, heavy thinking. "How long do I have?" "There's a meeting tonight in Bridgeport. Vallon, his lieutenants, and Silas Kane, who defected from Voss's organization, with financial records he's presenting as proof that Voss is finished. The meeting is in." She checked the time on the burner, 4 hours and 20 minutes. "If I'm going to kill Vallon's credibility before that meeting, you can't. There's not enough time for print." She'd already worked this part through in the van on the way over, turning it in her hands like a problem with a shape she could find. "But you can make a call. You have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. A woman named Delaney. You quoted her in your piece 18 months ago about Vallon's port operation. If Delaney receives the drive contents tonight, she can freeze the meeting. Not arrest anyone, not yet, but she can put enough federal attention on that restaurant that Vallon won't do business there." Tillman stared at her. "You've thought about this." "I've had about 90 minutes in a van to think about this." "Yes. And Delaney. I know she's not dirty. She's the one person in this chain Mercer couldn't have gotten to, because she works federal, and Mercer's contacts are city and county. The 2 structures don't talk enough for him to have reached her." Nia leaned forward slightly. "Call her. Tell her you have documentation of Mercer's relationship with Vallon and that the documentation will be in her inbox within the hour. Tell her about tonight's meeting. Let her decide what to do with the information." Tillman was quiet. She could hear him, breathing, slow and deliberate, the breathing of a man who was checking the structure of a decision the way a builder checks a foundation. She let him have the silence. She did not fill it. "All right," he said. "I'll call Delaney." Her exhale was controlled enough that he probably didn't catch it. "Thank you. Don't thank me. If this drive has one document that doesn't hold up, I'm going to write a very different story." He held up the drive. "About the source." "That's fair," she said. And she meant it. She was back in the van and 6 blocks north when her burner rang. "Marcus, your mother is out," he said. "She's with Doyle. She's angry." "Yeah." The relief was physical, a loosening across her shoulder blades. She hadn't known she was bracing. She would be. "She's okay? She's very okay. She's already argued with Doyle twice about where they're going. That's her. She pressed her palm against the cold van window. The city was moving out there. Late evening. Lights coming on. Tillman is calling. Delaney. What's Damien's position? A pause. The kind that meant the answer was complicated. There was a development. She waited. Kane moved the meeting, Marcus said. It's no longer in Bridgeport. When did this happen? 30 minutes ago. Someone tipped Tim. That federal attention was coming to the restaurant. Means. Someone in Valen's circle is feeding back the other way, she said. Or Mercer figured out what we were doing and warned them. We don't know yet. The meeting is now at a private facility in Pilsen, warehouse district. It's a location Valen controls more completely, no exterior cameras, controlled access, his own security on every approach. Her stomach dropped about 2 inches. Damien is already moving. Marcus, I know. He's not in condition. She stopped. She could hear herself starting to say the thing that wasn't her call to say. She'd cleaned the wound twice now. She knew exactly what was under that, bandaging a body, doing its best to repair a gunshot injury while its owner refused to rest, refused to stop, refused to treat himself as anything other than fully operational. He's going to reopen that wound. Yes, Marcus said simply. He knows that, and he's going. He's already gone. The van hit a red light. She stared through the windshield at the back of Doyle's head, at the city intersection beyond him, at the ordinary Tuesday night, playing out in a Chicago she suddenly felt enormously far from, even though she was sitting in the middle of it. Where? She said. Doyle turned slightly, just the angle of his head, listening. Nia, Marcus said, I'm a nurse. I need to know where he is in case he needs medical attention. She kept her voice even. Give me the address. Another longer. I'm not authorized to. Marcus. She put something in his name that wasn't a demand and wasn't a plea, but occupied the narrow space between them. Give me the address. The light changed. The van didn't move. Doyle knows it, Marcus said. And then the line went dead. She looked at the back of Doyle's head. Doyle looked straight ahead at the green light and didn't move. You heard that, she said. I heard it. You know where the warehouse is. I know where every location Voss uses within city limits is. That's my job. He still didn't pull forward. Behind them, a car honked once. Getting you there is a different conversation. Then let's have it fast, because there's a car behind us. Doyle pulled forward through the intersection, drove half a block, and pulled to the curb. He put the van in park and turned around and looked at her with the face that had decided long ago not to give anything away, and gave something away. What you're asking, he said, is to go to a location where Valen's security controls every approach, where there are potentially a dozen armed men, and where Damien Voss is going to be doing something extremely dangerous. Yes, because he might need medical attention. Yes, and not for any other reason. She held his gaze. She didn't answer that one, because the honest answer was more complicated than the situation had time for. And Doyle seemed like a man who could read silence accurately enough that she didn't need to. He turned back around. Put the van in drive. The kit in the back, he said. Make sure you know where everything is. The warehouse in Pilsen was the kind of building that didn't announce itself. Low profile, corrugated metal siding, surrounded by other buildings of similar character, the whole district, a working geography of things, arriving and departing, and no one asking too many questions about either. Doyle stopped the van 2 blocks east and killed the lights. Valen's perimeter is 4 men on the outside approaches, he said quietly. 2 on the east, 1 north, 1 south. The meeting is inside, 2nd level. There's a loading bay on the west side that's accessible if you know the code, and the code hasn't been changed. He paused. Code is Valen's people's code, not ours. Then how? Damien has a contact inside. Different from Rayo. Someone who isn't compromised. His eyes were on the building. The contact opened the west bay 20 minutes ago. Damien and 2 men went in. 2 men against. He's not going in to fight a room full of people. He's going in to get Kane. Something in Doyle's voice shifted, just slightly. Kane, specifically. Whatever Valen has, or doesn't have, the thing that cannot exist is Kane standing in that room presenting 6 years of operational knowledge as legitimate collateral for a new arrangement. Damien burns that specifically. Everything else he'll deal with from outside. She processed this. If Kane has already presented the informations, then it's a different problem. But Rio confirmed the meeting was delayed. Kane hasn't gone in yet. He's being held in a staging area on the ground floor, while Valen finalizes the terms upstairs. Doyle finally looked at her, which means Damien has a window. How big? Small, he said it without decoration. She looked at the building. 2 blocks away, a corrugated metal box in the dark, with armed men on its perimeter, and Valen's network inside, and Damien Voss, somewhere in its walls with a gunshot wound that had been seeping since morning, moving through it in the dark, with 2 men and a window that was small. The West Bay, she said. How do I get to it? You don't, Doyle. There's a man on the south approach between here and there. Former military, Valen recruited him out of a federal contracting company 3 years ago. He will not be moved by conversation. He turned to face her fully. I'm telling you the layout, not the route in. Then tell me the layout until I can figure out the route myself. He looked at her for a long moment with the face that gave nothing away, and gave her what she needed anyway. Second level has 1 stairwell on the east side, and a freight elevator on the west. Staging area where Kane is being held is northeast corner of the ground floor. There's a bathroom 20 feet from the staging area that was being used as overflow storage when Valen's people set up. A pause. Kit in the back has everything you'd need for a field assessment and basic stabilization. Nothing surgical. I know what's in the kit. I know you know. He turned back to the windshield. There's a fire door on the south face of the building, 40 feet from the corner. It opens outward, and the latch has been broken for approximately 8 months. None of Valen's external security is positioned to see it directly. She was already reaching for the kit. Fire door opened exactly as described, with a sound like a held breath releasing, and she was inside. Ground floor. Dark, except for work lights at the far end. Industrial yellow, throwing long shadows between the shelving units and equipment pallets that lined the space. She could hear voices from above, muffled, indistinct. The sound of a meeting that hadn't started yet, or had started, and was still in its preliminary architecture. She moved along the wall, kept low, kept slow, the kit over one shoulder, her sneakers quiet on the concrete. The nurse part of her brain was doing its inventory automatically. Sightlines, exits, the location of every light source. The 2 men she could see at the far end, who were positioned near a door and were not looking in her direction. Staging area. Northeast corner. She was 20 feet from the bathroom. Doyle had described when she heard it a sound she knew. The specific controlled exhale of a person managing pain coming from behind a closed door to her left. Stopped. Put her ear near the door. Heard breathing. 2 sets. 1 steady, 1 not. She opened the door. Damien was on 1 knee on the floor, which told her everything she needed to know about the state of the wound, because Damien Voss did not put himself on 1 knee voluntarily. His left hand was pressed against his right side, and the dark color on his fingers was wet, and she could smell the iron of it from the doorway. The man crouched beside him. She didn't know one of the 2 he'd brought, presumably, and he looked up at her with an expression that moved rapidly from threat to confusion to something close to relief. Damien looked up. What are you? Don't. She was already down beside him, already pulling the kit open, already assessing with her hands, because her hands were faster than conversation. The bandaging soaked through, worse than she'd feared. The wound had reopened along the lower edge and was actively bleeding in a way that the field dressing had been losing ground against for what felt like at least an hour. How long? 40 minutes. His voice was tight, controlled. Working. Why didn't you? Because I don't have 40 minutes to spend stopping. His jaw was set hard. Specific set of someone overriding a body that is sending very clear signals about what it wants. Kane is 30 feet from here. He goes upstairs and he checked the time on the phone in his right hand, the hand that wasn't pressing against his side. 11 minutes. You can't move in 11 minutes. I don't need to move far. She packed the wound with fresh gauze and applied pressure with both hands, and he made a sound through his teeth that was not quite a sound. A thing compressed and swallowed before it fully formed. Hold still, she said. Nia. Hold still. She looked at the man she didn't know. What's your name? Garrett. Garrett. I need you to maintain this pressure while I tape it. Both hands. Right here. Don't move them until I tell you. She guided his hands into position, and he applied pressure without hesitation, which told her he'd done field medicine before. at least watched it. She worked fast. Tape, more gauze. Tape again, building a compression that wasn't surgical, but would hold longer than nothing. Kane, Damien said, through the compression, through the effort of staying still. He's going to walk out that door and up those stairs, and everything Valen has will become real collateral. I heard. I know I need 60 seconds with him. That's all. She looked up from the wound. His face was 3 feet from hers, gray under the poor light. The lines around his eyes deepened by pain and effort, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had been going since before dawn on a body that was asking for things he wasn't giving it. She had looked at a lot of faces in her career, and she had learned to read them the way you learn to read weather. And what she read in his right now was not recklessness. Precision. A man who had calculated exactly what he needed and exactly how much it would cost, and had decided the cost was acceptable. "Can you stand?" she said. "Yes." "Do it slowly." He stood. Slowly, as instructed, with Garrett's hand briefly under his arm, and he straightened to full height, and the breath he took when he was upright was deliberate and measured. And she watched it and watched his face and watched the color and made her assessment. "You have 20 minutes, she said. "After that, the compression fails, and we have a real problem. 20 minutes and we leave." Something moved across his face. "Naya, 20 minutes, she said. "I'm not negotiating." His eyes held hers for 3 seconds, and something in them changed. A small and genuine shift that she'd file away to think about later when there was time to think about things. He nodded. He opened the storage room door and looked toward the northeast corner, and then he was moving, low and fast and impossibly quiet. For a man with a fresh wound and a body that had every reason to be loud about its objections. And Garrett was behind him. And she was behind Garrett, the kid over her shoulder, her heart going at a rate she was monitoring, the way she monitored patients, clinically, as data. The staging area door was metal, lightweight, the kind that industrial spaces used between sections. It was not locked. Damien pushed through it, and she heard a voice inside go very still. She didn't go in. She stayed in the doorway and watched. Silas Kane was sitting on a folding chair against the far wall, dressed in the same quality of coat he'd worn to her hospital, the coat of a man who had always known exactly what he was worth, and had been recently told he was worth more. He looked at Damien, and the color left his face in a single, complete movement, like water draining. "You're dead," Kane said. "Close." Damien crossed the room in 5 steps. "The drives you took." Kane's eyes moved to Garrett, calculating. Back to Damien. "What about them?" "Incomplete." Damien's voice was even. He sounded, Naya thought, like a man who had all the time in the world, which was an extraordinary performance, given that she was the only one in the building who knew he had 19 minutes. "You handed Valen a map to a city that does exist anymore. The accounts are closed. The contacts are reshuffled. The structural data is 6 months stale." He stopped 2 feet from Kane and looked at him with an expression that had no heat in it whatsoever, which was somehow the most frightening thing in the room. "You handed him nothing." The silence that followed had a weight. Kane's jaw worked. "You're bluffing." "I never bluff." "You know that." Damien tilted his head slightly. "You've known it for 6 years. Something shifted in Kane's face. Not the dramatic collapse of a man caught in a lie, but something smaller and more real, the specific micro-expression of a person realizing they'd made an irreversible calculation on bad data. The math rerunning, the answer coming back wrong. "The restructure," Kane said slowly, 3 weeks ago. Rio helped. "You didn't know because you were already feeding information out by then, and I didn't trust you with new architecture." Damien paused. "I hadn't confirmed it yet, but I watched you, Silas. The way information moved. The things Valen's people knew that they shouldn't. I wasn't certain until 4 days ago, but I'd been watching." Kane's hands were on his knees. They tightened slightly. "What are you going to do?" "Tell Valen, not here. He'll find out the same way he finds out everything through his analysts. When they try to access accounts that don't exist and reach contacts that have been moved. He'll figure out on his own that you brought him a shell." Damien's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. "And then you'll have a different kind of problem than the one you came here to solve." Kane stood up. Garrett moved, and Damien raised one hand easy, and Garrett held his position. "You didn't come here to kill me," Kane said. "No." "Then why?" Because I wanted you to know, Damien said. Before you walked upstairs and presented yourself as something valuable. I wanted you to walk into that room, knowing you were bringing him nothing. He paused. Pause of a man who has thought this through and decided that the psychological cost to Kane is more durable than any physical consequence. That's enough. Kane stared at him. She could see it from the doorway, the specific expression of a man who has spent years reading Damien Voss and is now being read by him in return, precisely and without mercy, and knows it. Then something happened that she didn't anticipate. Kane reached into his coat. Garrett moved. Damien moved. Kane's hand came out with a phone, not a weapon, and he held it up with both hands clear and open, his face now showing something she hadn't expected to see there. Calculation of a completely different kind. There's a third set of drives, Kane said. The room went still. What? Damien's voice was flat. I made a copy. Before I took the set you knew about. Copy of the actual current records. Kane's eyes were steady now. Panic had resolved into something colder and more functional. I had a contact inside your operation who gave me access to the restructured files. Not Rio. He let that land. Someone else. The air in the room changed the way air changed in a hospital when a monitor started the wrong kind of beeping completely, with a quality that altered everything. Damien's face was absolutely still. Who? He said. One word. The weight of a door closing. Kane looked at the phone in his hand, then at Damien. His mouth moved once before the words came. The only question is whether you want to know the answer badly enough to make a deal for it. From the floor above them came the sound of chairs moving, footsteps, voices adjusting the sonic signature of a meeting assembling, people finding their positions, structural noise of something large, beginning to organize itself toward a conclusion. Damien's 18 minutes were almost gone. The wound was seeping through the compression. She could see it from the doorway, the dark spread at his side, and his face was the face of a man who was running last of something and had just been handed a piece of information that changed the geometry of everything. She watched him stand in that room with Kane's phone and Kane's revelation, and the sound of Veldon's meeting assembling above them, and she could see him calculating, and she could see what it was costing him to hold still and think when every remaining piece of his body was asking him to move. He turned, looked at her in the doorway. His eyes found hers and held them, and in the quality of that look was something she would spend a long time afterward trying to put in order, not fear, not defeat, but the look of a man who has just understood that the war he thought he was finishing has a room he hadn't mapped yet, and the entrance to that room is standing in front of him, and he doesn't know yet what's inside. We need to go, she said quietly. He turned back to Kane. You stay in this room, he said. You don't go upstairs. You tell Valen you need more time. His voice allowed nothing. If you're still here when I send someone back, we'll have a conversation about your offer. Kane looked at him, looked at the phone, sat back down. Damien walked to the doorway, walked past her without stopping. She fell in behind him, and Garrett behind her, and they moved back through the industrial dark toward the fire door on the south face. And she put her hand briefly against his side and felt the wet warmth through his coat. And she said nothing because there was nothing to say, and he said nothing because he understood. And they moved through the building and out into the cold Chicago air, where the city was doing its ordinary evening business all around them, in complete ignorance of everything. She pressed him against the exterior wall and pulled the coat back and looked at the compression in the half-dark of a streetlight 40 feet away. And it was worse than she'd thought, but not unsurvivable, not yet. She looked up at his face and found it gray and set and present. Someone else, he said. His voice was very quiet. I know. Inside the restructure. Someone who knew the new architecture. I know, she held his gaze. How many people had access? He looked at the building, at the city, at something she couldn't see. And then he looked back at her and said the name, before he'd apparently decided to say it. The name coming out, low and rough, and with the quality of something that had been sitting in the back of a mind and had just been let out, Marcus. The word landed between them in the cold air and sat there. She didn't flinch. She didn't fill the silence. She held his gaze and let him have the weight of it and waited for what came next. Because something was coming next, and it was going to change everything that came after it. And the city moved around them indifferent and enormous and cold. And above them, in the warehouse, the sounds of Valen's meeting reached their assembled conclusion. He said Marcus's name, and then neither of them moved for 3 seconds that felt longer than 3 seconds. The wait time moved in emergencies, stretching at the joints. Then Naya said, "You don't know that." No, his voice was careful, contained, but it fits. A lot of things fit until they don't. She pulled the coat back over the compression and looked at his face. The gray was worse in the streetlight than it had been inside. "Right now you're losing blood and we need to move. Everything else is a conversation for later." He didn't argue. She took that as a sign of how bad it actually was. Doyle had the van running half a block up. They got Damien into the back, and she worked on him while Doyle drove, cutting the old compression away and replacing it with what she had left in the kit, which was enough, barely, if she was efficient, and he stayed still. Stayed still. He'd gotten very good at staying still under her hands in the last 4 days, which was either trust or exhaustion, and was probably both. "Talk," she said. "Not a question." "About what?" "About Marcus. Walk me through it." He was quiet for a moment, the van moving under them, the city outside going about its Tuesday night. The restructure 3 weeks ago. Marcus knew the full scope. He was the only one besides me who saw the complete picture: new accounts, new contacts, the physical location of the primary drives. A breath. Controlled. He had access because I needed someone I trusted completely to verify the migration. And you trusted him completely. More than anyone. The words came out flat. Flatness of something that had been sitting in the dark and was only now being held up to light. 12 years. She taped the last edge of the compression and sat back. The wound was stabilized. Not good at all, but stabilized. She looked at him in the dim light of the van's interior. "He saved me from Kane in the hospital." "I know. He's the one who got me out of the building this morning." "I know. That doesn't fit someone who's been feeding information to Valen." He looked at her. His eyes were dark and tired and working. "It fits someone who's been feeding information to Valen, but doesn't want you hurt." He paused. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She sat with that. The van hit a seam in the road, and she put her hand on his arm automatically, steadying, and left it there a moment longer than steadying required, and took it back. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Find out if I'm right first." His jaw set. "And then deal with it." "How?" Kane made an offer. Information about his source in exchange for a deal. He exhaled slowly. "I'm going to hear what he has to say." They went back to the warehouse. Not the Pilsen warehouse, the first one, the safe house, with the concrete floors and the folding table and the smell of machine oil underneath everything else. Doyle got Damien inside and onto a cot, and she stood over him and told him he needed to stay horizontal for at least 2 hours. And he told her 2 hours wasn't available, and she told him she wasn't negotiating, and he stayed horizontal. Marcus arrived 40 minutes later. She was in the kitchen area. Such as it was when she heard the door and heard Doyle's voice, and heard a second voice that she recognized without needing to see him. She stood with her hands around a cup of cold coffee and waited. Marcus came into the kitchen. He looked at her. She looked at him. His face was doing the thing it always did. The processing, the deliberate intake before response, and she watched it and looked for the thing that might have always been there and that she hadn't been calibrated to see. "He wants to talk to you," she said. "I know," Doyle told me. He set his jacket on the back of a chair with the economy of motion that was simply who he was. Every movement efficient, nothing wasted. "How bad is the wound?" "Bad enough that he needs a hospital and won't go to one." She paused. "You know why he wants to talk to you?" Marcus's eyes held hers. 1 second. 2. "Kane," he said. Kane said there was a third set of drives, copy of the current records. Someone inside the restructure gave him access. She kept her voice level. "Damien said your name." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the building, she could hear Doyle moving, and beyond that, the distant sound of Chicago doing what Chicago did, permanent and indifferent. "He's right," Marcus said. She had expected it, and it still landed with weight. Why? It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, asked in the same tone she used when she needed a patient to tell her something difficult, and she needed them to actually tell it, not the version they thought she wanted to hear. Marcus recognized the tone or something in it, because his face shifted in a way she hadn't seen it shift before, not opening exactly, but releasing something it had been holding. My brother, he said. He's been inside a federal facility for 4 years. Nonviolent, drug-related, a situation where the sentence didn't fit the crime, and I couldn't fix it through legitimate channels. He paused. Valen has a relationship with a federal judge in the Northern District. 3 months ago, he offered me a commutation in exchange for access to Damien's restructured records. She absorbed this. You took it. I copied the drives and handed them to a courier. I told myself it was a contained thing, that Valen would use the financial data to negotiate, not to move against Damien directly. His jaw worked. I was wrong. You knew when the building was hit this morning. Yes. And you still got me out. You still brought me to Doyle. Yes. Why? She said it the same way she'd said why a minute ago. Not accusatory. Genuinely wanting to understand the architecture of the decision. Marcus looked at the floor, then back at her. Because you're not part of this. Pulled a man out of the snow because that's who you are. Whatever I did, whatever it cost you, didn't deserve to be in the line of it. Something moved through his face that was complicated and real and probably the most unguarded she'd seen him. And because I knew, when I made the choice, that eventually I'd have to stand in front of Damien and account for it. I wasn't going to be the reason you were hurt when that happened. She thought about that for a moment. Specific moral geography of it, a man who betrayed someone he'd served for 12 years in order to free his brother, who then protected the one innocent person in the situation as a form of partial accounting. Not good, not simple, human, in the way that human was never clean. He's waiting, she said. I know. She stepped back from the doorway to let him through. She didn't go into the room. She stood in the hallway outside and didn't listen or tried not to, and mostly succeeded. What she heard was the sound of 2 men's voices in the sustained, low-register exchange of a conversation. That was not a confrontation which surprised her. She'd expected heat. What came through the wall was something heavier and quieter than heat. It went on for 23 minutes. She knew because she watched the time, the nurse habit of tracking duration. And at the 23rd minute, the voices stopped, and the door opened, and Marcus came out. He looked at her without stopping and walked to the exit. And Doyle, who had been present and invisible in the corner of the corridor, looked at her with a question he didn't ask. Leave him for a minute, she said. She gave it 5. Then she went in. Damien was still on the cot, which meant the conversation had done something his body couldn't override. He was on his back, one arm over his eyes, and he looked for a moment, just for a moment, in the poor light, with his arm covering his face like a man who was very tired and had nowhere to put it. She sat on the cot across from him. Tell me what you're going to do with him. He moved his arm, looked at the ceiling. Nothing. She waited. He's done, Damien said. We're done. 12 years and we're done. And I'm not going to do anything to him because doing something to Marcus costs more than it returns. And because he stopped. Because his brother didn't do anything. And I'm not going to take 12 years of loyalty and repay it by making his brother's situation worse. His voice was even, the evenness of something that had already been processed in the minutes before she came in. I'll have his access cut, his connection to the organization severed. He walks away. She looked at him. That's not what people expect from you. No. Kane, Valen. Everyone watching, they expect something else. I know what they expect. He finally looked at her, tilting his head on the cot to meet her eyes. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of being predictable. She almost said something about what she thought was really underneath that decision. She stopped herself, because it wasn't the time, and because he probably knew, and because some things didn't need to be said to be understood. Kane's information, she said instead. The offer he made. I sent Garrett back to the warehouse. Kane confirmed it was Marcus. In exchange, I've agreed not to put Kane in a position where Valen decides he's a liability. He paused. Kane can walk away with nothing. No records that matter. No organization behind him. No play in this city. He disappears. And Valen? He sat up slowly, with the careful engineering of a man managing a body that had strong opinions about the direction. Valen is getting a visit tonight from federal agents. Delaney moved faster than you expected. By the time you called Tillman, and Tillman called her and she ran the drive contents, she had enough for an emergency warrant. Something in his voice shifted, not satisfaction, exactly, but the specific quality of a thing that has been a long time coming arriving on schedule. They hit the Bridgeport restaurant first, found it empty, which rattled them, then got redirected to the Pilsen warehouse. Valen and 6 of his people were still on the second floor when the agents came through. She stared at him. You knew this was going to happen. I knew Delaney would move fast if the documentation was solid. He looked at his hands. Tillman helped. He called her before you were even back in the van. You planned this before you sent me to Tillman. I planned it as a possibility. Pilsen location was a complication I didn't anticipate. But Valen, staying in the building after the meeting assembled, he exhaled. Methodical men don't run when they think they're safe. He thought the meeting was contained. He thought he was the one with the complete picture. She absorbed this. The whole architecture of it, the way each piece had been placed in a particular order, the documentation, Tillman, Delaney, the timing. She thought about the small and genuine shift she'd seen in his eyes in the storage room of the warehouse. When she'd told him 20 minutes, she wondered how much of those 20 minutes he'd spent calculating what she was only now understanding. You're going to need to tell me, she said, when you're using me as part of a plan. I didn't use you. You sent me to Tillman knowing it would set off a chain of events. I sent you to Tillman because you were the only person who could make that contact credibly. He held her gaze. That's not the same as using you. That's trusting you with the part that mattered most. He paused. Difference. She held his gaze back. The room was quiet around them. The city was quiet for once, or she was past hearing its noise, and the silence had a particular quality, not empty, but full. The way silences got between people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it, and finding that the other side had its own landscape to navigate. Mercer, she said, Delaney has him. He was picked up at his home at 9:17 tonight. Something cold and clean moved through his voice. He won't be coming back to anyone's street. She thought about the photograph, her mother's street, the woman standing 2 houses down with her hands in her pockets. She thought about her mother angry in a car with Doyle, which she would very much have liked to have seen, and about the Sunday calls, and about the life that had been sitting in suspended animation for 4 days, waiting for her to come back to it. My mother, she said. Doyle is taking her home tonight. She doesn't know anything specific. She knows you're safe. He paused. Doyle is very good at explaining things without explaining things. She's going to have questions. Yes. He didn't offer a solution for that, which she appreciated, because there wasn't one. Some conversations were going to happen and be difficult, and she was going to have to be honest in the ways she could be honest and careful in the ways she needed to be careful. And that was simply the shape of what came next. She slept for 6 hours on the cot in the room, at the end of the hall, the sleep of a body that had run its account to zero, and required immediate payment. She woke up at 4 in the morning to the building's silence and lay still for a moment, cataloging. She was whole. She was unhurt. She was in a warehouse in a city she'd lived in for 31 years. And she didn't know yet what the next week looked like, but she was whole and she was unhurt, and that was a place to start. She got up and went to check on Damien. He was not on his cot. She found him at the window, the one grimy warehouse window that looked out over the rear of the building and a strip of alley, and, beyond that, the city lights going orange and gray in the pre-dawn. He was standing with his arms at his sides, not leaning, because leaning put pressure on the wound, and she could see by the set of his shoulders that he'd been awake for a while. You're supposed to be lying down, she said. I know. Came to stand beside him at the window. Not close. A respectful distance. They looked out at the city together. The same city they'd both been in the middle of for 4 days. The same city that had been going about itself the entire time. Enormous and indifferent and full of its own business. It's over, she said. Not a question. Just a thing that needed to be said out loud to become real. Valen's organization will take time to fully dismantle. There are people below him who'll try to... He stopped, looked at her. For you, it's over, yes. What does that mean? For me, it means you can go home. Your apartment, your job, your life, he said it, carefully. Each piece of it, like he was returning items he'd been holding. I've had the security detail on your building stood down. Mercer's connection to anyone who might be interested in you is severed. The people who knew your name in Valen's network are either federal or running, and running men don't circle back to loose ends. She thought about her apartment, the hallway light she always left on, coffee can, the linoleum she'd scrubbed twice. The $10,000, she said, something like the not quite smile. Keep it. I don't want it. Then donate it. He turned from the window to face her. You earned whatever you do with it. She looked at him, fully, the way she hadn't entirely allowed herself to look at him since all this started, not the nurse's assessment, not the strategic red, but simply the person. A hard face in the early dark, older than it wanted to be, carrying things that had been carried too long, without being put down. The wound pulling at his side that he was managing without drama. The 12 years of Marcus sitting somewhere in his chest, not a wound she could pack and tape, but a wound nonetheless. What happens to you? She said. I'll handle what needs to be handled. Rebuild what can be rebuilt. He paused. Rethink some things. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. His eyes held hers. I don't have a clean version to give you, I know. She crossed her arms. I'm not asking for a clean version. I'm asking what actually happens. He was quiet for a moment. The federal case against Valen will create space. The networks he controlled will need to reconfigure. There's a period, a few months, maybe longer, where everything settles into a new shape. His voice was careful, measured. I'll be operating in that period. Operating. Yes. You're not going to stop. No. She'd known that. She'd known it in the way she sometimes knew things about patients before they said them. The body language, the pattern of avoidance, the specific way someone's eyes moved when they were about to tell you something they'd already decided on. She'd known it and she'd asked anyway, because she needed him to say it, not because she thought it would change what came next, but because she wanted it, said plainly between them. You're not a good man, she said. Not an accusation, just the fact of it offered with the same plainness he'd been offering her facts for 5 days. He looked at her for a long moment. No, you don't want to be. He stopped. Something moved through his face that was more complicated than yes or no. I want certain things that good men want, for certain people not to be hurt, for certain situations to resolve in a way that doesn't cost everyone. He paused. But the methods I know are the methods I know. I don't have a different set. She thought about that. You let Marcus go. Yes. Cost you something. Yes. And Cain. Yes. Out the window. The city was beginning its slow pre-dawn movement, the first trucks, the earliest lights. In a few hours it would be a Wednesday, ordinary and full of its own business, and she would be going back to a life that was still mostly intact. And this window would be behind her, and the man standing in front of it would continue to be exactly what he was in a city that would never fully stop needing people like him to exist, and would also never fully admit it. The man I pulled out of the snow, she said, and the man standing here, they're both real. Yes. I'm not going to pretend one of them isn't. I know, and I'm not going to make what you do into something it isn't. She turned to face him. I'm not going to call it necessary or justified or any of the other words people use when they want to feel better about something that doesn't need to be felt better about. He held her gaze. What do you call it? She thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it. Not the quick answer. Not the comfortable one. Yours, she said finally. It's yours. I saved your life. Kept me alive. We're done. What you do next is yours. His eyes were so steady on her face. She watched something move through them, not relief, not gratitude, but something more fundamental. The specific quality of a person who has been seen accurately and has not flinched away from being seen. Doyle will take you home, he said. This morning. Whenever you're ready. I'm ready now. All right. She turned toward the hallway. Stopped. Not because she was going to change her mind. She wasn't going to change her mind because there was one more thing. Your wound needs a follow-up in 48 hours, she said without turning around. The compression is holding, but the tissue needs assessment. If you develop fever or the site goes red in a spreading pattern, you need surgical intervention, regardless of whatever else is happening. She paused. I'm telling you as a nurse. I understand. I'm not telling you as anything else. I know. She started walking again. Behind her, she heard him say her name once, quietly, and she stopped and waited. Thank you, he said, for the coffee. 4 days ago. both cups. She almost laughed. The sound that came out wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. Brief and undefended, and she kept walking and didn't look back, because looking back was not the shape of what this was, and she knew the shape of what it was, and it was enough. Doyle drove her in the gray, early morning. She sat in the passenger seat this time, not the back, and the city came up around them as they moved south, familiar and large and indifferent, the same city it had always been. She watched it through the window without trying to name what she was feeling, because what she was feeling was too mixed to have one name, and that was all right. Her building looked the same. Obviously, it looked the same. She'd been gone 5 days, not 5 years, and buildings didn't change because their occupants had been through something. Buzzer panel, the broken elevator finally apparently fixed because a maintenance notice was taped to it. The 3 flights of stairs she'd climbed 1,000 times. She climbed them now, and her body noted the fatigue, and she noted the body, noting the fatigue, and kept moving. Her door was locked. She unlocked it and went in and stood in her own hallway, in her own apartment, and breathed the specific air of it, the particular smell of a space that belonged to her, and felt the shape of ordinary life pressing in from all sides, like something she'd been holding at a distance, finally allowed to come close. The hallway light was still on. She'd left it on. She went to the kitchen. The linoleum was clean. She crouched and looked at the place where it had been, and looked as hard as she could, and there was nothing to see. Good. She stood up, put water on, found the coffee in the cabinet. The cheap kind, her kind, and made a pot, and while it was running she went to her bedroom and changed into clean clothes, and came back and poured a cup, and stood at her kitchen window and looked out at the same street she'd looked out at 1,000 mornings. The black SUV was not there. She looked for it from habit, and it wasn't there, and the absence of it was its own particular thing to feel. She called her mother at 6:30. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "Tell me everything," her mother said. "I can't tell you everything," she said, "but I'm home and I'm okay, and I have a very strange week to explain to you, and I need you to know that first I'm okay before any of the rest of it." Her mother was quiet, in the particular warm way she was quiet. "Then come for dinner Sunday." "Yes." "Bring nothing." "I'll cook." "Mom, don't argue with me, Nia. Come for dinner and tell me what you can tell me, and we'll figure out the rest." She looked out the window. The street was coming awake, the morning beginning its ordinary business. A woman with a dog, a delivery truck, someone flagging a cab. Chicago doing what Chicago did. "Sunday," she said. "I'll be there." She hung up, stood in the quiet kitchen with the coffee cup warm in her hands. After a while she went and sat on the couch and pulled her knees up and let the apartment hold her for a while without doing anything in particular. The light shifted as the morning came on. She didn't move. She didn't need to move yet. She thought about a bleeding man in the snow, and the 2 fingers she'd pressed to his neck, and the fraction of a second, and it had been a fraction of a second. She was honest about that, in which she'd thought about walking away. She hadn't walked away. She wasn't sure she could ever have walked away. Not really. Not the way she was built. 2 seconds of hesitation had been fear, and the fear had been real, and she'd moved past it, because moving past it was what you did when you were the person who stopped and crouched down and checked. That was still who she was. The last 5 days had not changed that. They'd tested it, pushed it into shapes. She hadn't known it could go, shown her the edge of what she could handle in the particular way that emergencies showed you things about yourself that ordinary life kept politely covered. But the person on the other side of it was the same person, a little rougher, a little less inclined to pretend that the world was simpler than it was. Not innocent, exactly. She wasn't sure she'd been fully innocent going in, but without the particular softness that came from not having looked at certain things directly. She had looked at certain things directly now. She was going to have to carry that and go back to the surgical recovery ward and have ordinary conversations and fill out ordinary forms. And she was going to do all of that, and it was going to be fine, and it was going to be different. And both of those things were going to be true at the same time. At 8:15 she got up, washed her face, ate something, because she hadn't eaten properly in 36 hours, and her body had opinions. Called the hospital and told them she was coming back tomorrow. Not today, that she'd had a family situation. and her supervisor said, "Take the time you need," in a tone that meant, "Don't make this a habit." And she said, "I'll see you tomorrow." She sat back down, looked at the phone, looked at the blank piece of paper where the 12-digit number had been, which she had removed from under the coffee can on her first night away, and folded into the pocket of the jacket she'd been wearing since, without examining why she'd taken it instead of leaving it, and which she took out now and unfolded and looked at. She didn't call it. She looked at it for a long time, and then she folded it again and put it in the drawer of her bedside table and closed the drawer. Not a decision, or a decision that didn't need to be named yet. She left it in the drawer and went back to the window and watched the street and let the morning come in. Outside, Chicago was wet from a new band of weather that had moved through overnight. The streets shining in the early sun, everything cleaned and briefly simple. The blizzard system that had started all of this had long since finished moving east, and the city it had left behind looked, from her third-floor window, almost manageable. Almost like a place where the ordinary architecture of a life could hold. Pressed her forehead once against the cold glass. Closed her eyes. Breathed in, breathed out, the simple, reliable machinery of a body that had been through something and was still standing. Then she stepped back from the window and went to make a second cup of coffee, and the morning opened up around her, unremarkable and hers.